Some medieval inventions were so bad, they didn't just fail, they made life worse. From weapons that exploded on their own soldiers, to safety devices that killed more people than they saved, these 9 creations prove that innovation isn't always progress. And once you hear them, you'll never look at the Middle Ages the same way again. The chastity belt. Picture this. You're a medieval nobleman heading off to war for months. You want to make sure your wife stays faithful. Instead of trust or communication, you decide to lock her body in an iron cage. These belts were marketed as security systems for women's bodies, complete with locks, spikes, and leather straps. On paper, it sounds like control. In practice, it was a nightmare. Hygiene, non-existent. Comfort, forget it. Infections, sores, and even death from sepsis weren't rare. And here's the kicker. Most historians agree. These devices weren't actually common in the Middle Ages at all. They were more of a cruel joke or a Renaissance museum piece than a household reality, which makes the invention even more absurd. Someone actually sat down, designed this medieval padlock for genitals, and thought, yes, progress. Instead of solving the problem of infidelity, it created disease, humiliation, and lifelong trauma. But if locking people up wasn't enough, how about locking nature up? Enter the plague doctor mask. Everyone's seen the image, that long bird-like beak stuffed with herbs and spices. It looks like cosplay for an evil crow. The logic behind it: the Middle Ages believed diseases spread through miasma, or bad air. So if you stuffed lavender, mint, or dried flowers into a leather beak, you could supposedly filter out the sickness. Nice idea, if only the Black Death wasn't caused by fleas carrying bacteria. The result: doctors walked straight into plague-infested homes wearing what looked like carnival costumes, totally unprotected. Many of them died just as fast as everyone else. And the sight of one of these birdmen arriving at your door wasn't reassuring. It was a death sentence. Instead of a healing invention, it became the ultimate horror symbol, a medieval solution that solved nothing but gave nightmares for centuries. Next, let's talk about warfare. Because if there's one thing medieval people loved, it was inventing new ways to kill each other. The trebuchet, effective. The crossbow, revolutionary. But then there was the handgun, the ancestor of firearms. Imagine a metal tube on a stick. You shove in gunpowder, light it with a slow match, and hope it doesn't explode in your face. Accuracy, almost zero. Reload time, long enough for your enemy to stab you before you fire again. Soldiers described them as terrifying, not for the enemy, but for the poor soul trying to fire one. If it didn't backfire and maimed the user, the smoke and noise often caused more panic among friendly troops than in opposing ranks. So yes, it was technically an invention, but all it did was turn soldiers into walking hazards. The medieval handgun wasn't battlefield progress. It was Russian roulette with gunpowder. And then there was the ordeal by water, a judicial invention so nonsensical, it makes modern legal systems look like miracles of rationality. Picture yourself accused of witchcraft or heresy. No evidence needed, just suspicion. The solution: tie you up and throw you into a river. If you floated, congratulations, you were guilty, because water supposedly rejected evil. If you sank and drowned, well, sorry, turns out you were innocent after all. A legal invention designed to prove truth that almost guaranteed death. The ordeal wasn't just cruel. It solved nothing about justice. It turned trials into executions and turned water into a courtroom. Medieval innovation didn't just fail here. It drowned. Of course, not every medieval invention was deadly. Some were just laughably impractical. Enter the wheeled armor suit. Knights were already famous for wearing heavy plate armor that made moving difficult, so some genius decided to attach wheels to it. The idea was mobility. Roll your armored body into battle like a human siege engine. The reality: it looked ridiculous and barely moved. Accounts of such contraptions are rare, but illustrations suggest they were more of a parody than a weapon. Soldiers mocked them, enemies laughed at them, and the knight inside, completely useless. Instead of striking fear into opponents, the wheeled armor suit turned warriors into medieval punchlines, a literal invention that solved nothing except maybe boredom at the design table. And here's where it gets even stranger: medieval fire extinguishers. Today we pull a pin, spray foam, and out goes the fire. Back then, people invented fire grenades, glass or ceramic spheres filled with vinegar, or sometimes gunpowder. Yes, gunpowder. The logic was that throwing the sphere at a fire would release its contents and smother the flames. In practice, most of them either shattered harmlessly or exploded violently, making the fire worse. Imagine your house is burning, and the solution is to throw a bomb at it. Instead of stopping destruction, these grenades often multiplied it. Another invention that promised safety but delivered chaos. We're just scratching the surface, and already you can see the pattern. Invention didn't always mean progress in the Middle Ages. Sometimes it meant strapping wheels to armor, tossing bombs at fires, or locking people in iron underwear. And the strangest part, these weren't isolated accidents. They reveal how medieval people tried to solve real problems: war, disease, justice, infidelity, but ended up inventing disasters that outlived them in infamy. And trust me, the next invention on this list makes even the plague mask look reasonable. Because when medieval minds tried to improve farming, they built something so inefficient it nearly starved entire communities. When you think farming is simple, plow, sow, reap, medieval innovators somehow found a way to overcomplicate it. Take the horse collar. You'd think strapping a horse to a plow would be obvious, but early medieval inventors designed collars that pressed directly against the horse's throat. Instead of pulling efficiently, the poor animal could barely breathe, choking itself just to drag a plow through the soil. Fields yielded less, horses collapsed, and entire harvests suffered. It wasn't until centuries later that someone reshaped the collar to distribute weight across the chest. Only then did horses become the engines of agriculture we imagine today. Before that, the so-called innovation literally strangled productivity. Farming became harder, slower, and deadlier, all thanks to a collar meant to make life easier. But if you think suffocating horses is strange, wait until you hear how medieval people tried to innovate time itself. Enter the water clock. On paper, it was supposed to measure hours by the steady drip of water through a container. In practice, it leaked, froze in winter, evaporated in summer, and needed constant babysitting. Accuracy varied wildly, which is a problem when your society revolves around church bells and prayer schedules. Monks would wake at absurd hours, either too early or far too late, because their cutting-edge timepiece couldn't tell the difference between midnight and dawn. The invention solved nothing. Instead of structuring time, it fractured it, leaving whole communities out of sync. Imagine running a town where everyone's schedules depend on a bucket that can't keep water inside. That was medieval punctuality: chaotic, dripping, and completely unreliable. Then there were medieval eyeglasses. You might be thinking, wait, eyeglasses are useful. And yes, they eventually changed the world. But the first versions, disasters in glass. Instead of correcting vision, they magnified it to absurd degrees. Early lenses were clunky, heavy, and so poorly ground that they distorted sight almost as much as they improved it. People reported dizziness, headaches, and blurred vision that never went away. To make matters worse, the glasses weren't wearable in the modern sense. No arms, no comfort. Just two awkward glass discs you pinched against your nose or strapped to your head like torture goggles. Scholars trying to read with them often ended up with migraines so bad they couldn't work at all. A supposed invention for clarity left the world spinning, literally. Progress, not quite. More like medieval virtual reality sickness. Speaking of sickness, few inventions embody failure like the medieval cure-all known as the plague cure furnace. The idea was simple: smoke out the plague by fumigating entire homes with fire and herbs. Officials would seal houses, light fires inside, and let the smoke cleanse the air. What really happened? People suffocated, houses burned down, and survivors walked straight back into flea-infested chaos. Instead of stopping disease, the cure spread destruction faster than the illness itself. A medical invention that promised health but delivered ash. The plague cure furnace didn't save lives. It reduced neighborhoods to smoldering ruins, while the Black Death marched on untouched. But nothing screams medieval solution that solved nothing like the torture wheel. This wasn't invented to fix crime. It was invented to make crime look scarier. Authorities believed public torture would prevent wrongdoing, so they strapped prisoners to giant wheels, shattered their bones, and left them on display. Did crime disappear? Of course not. People grew desensitized to horror. Crowds gathered to watch the spectacle like entertainment. Instead of building safety, the wheel built trauma. Families watched neighbors torn apart. Children grew up treating cruelty as theater. The invention didn't stop crime. It normalized violence, a wheel that rolled society deeper into brutality, all under the illusion of law and order. And yet, some inventions were so strange, they didn't even cause fear. They caused ridicule. Take the rocket cart. Medieval alchemists experimented with gunpowder long before fireworks became fun. They strapped rockets to carts, hoping to create unstoppable war machines that could blaze across battlefields. What actually happened was closer to slapstick. The carts shot off wildly, spinning in circles, crashing into friendly lines, or exploding on the spot. Instead of terrifying the enemy, they provided free entertainment. Chroniclers mocked the idea as foolish, but inventors kept trying. They wanted the medieval equivalent of a tank. What they got was a rolling firework accident that solved nothing and sometimes killed the people who launched it. Every single one of these inventions followed the same tragic comedy: real problems, terrible fixes, food scarcity, plague, crime, war. These weren't small issues. They were life and death struggles. And yet the answers ranged from wheels that broke bodies to grenades that spread fire, from choking collars to glasses that blinded more than they clarified. It's almost poetic, the way desperation breeds invention, but not always the kind that makes life better. And here's the thing, we've only gone through part of the list, because the next medieval innovation we're about to explore was so absurd that it reshaped entire cities while solving nothing at all. A device so impractical that even the people who built it quickly realized it was worse than useless. And yet, traces of it still stand today. The invention I teased: medieval city walls with murder holes. At first glance, this sounds brilliant. Build strong fortifications, add clever traps, and your city is safe. Except reality wasn't nearly so smart. Builders carved openings in ceilings or gateways so defenders could drop rocks, boiling oil, or worse, onto attackers. The flaw: these holes worked both ways. Invading forces quickly figured out they could shoot arrows, fire flaming projectiles, or even climb through the same gaps. Instead of a defense, it became a liability. Towns spent fortunes constructing elaborate stonework that enemies simply exploited. Citizens thought they were buying safety, but ended up funding architectural weaknesses that invited disaster. A medieval invention meant to shield life often exposed it. But nothing highlights wasted ambition like the clock towers that didn't keep time. Across Europe, cities competed to show wealth and sophistication by building giant mechanical clocks. They were marvels of engineering, filled with gears and bells that chimed across neighborhoods. The problem? Accuracy. Early mechanics couldn't keep pace with real astronomy. Some clocks lost hours in a single day. Others ran so fast they needed constant resetting. People relied on them for prayer, trade, and governance. But instead of order, they got chaos. Imagine an entire market day ruined because the town clock insisted it was noon when it was actually morning. Instead of bringing unity, these towers fractured communities into endless arguments about what time it really was. The invention gave prestige but destroyed precision, a very expensive failure. And then there were heating braziers. Central heating didn't exist, so medieval households used portable firepots filled with coal or wood. The idea was warmth on demand. The reality, poison and fire. Closed rooms filled with carbon monoxide as smoke slowly suffocated families. Embers spilled and ignited homes, turning entire villages into tinderboxes. Chroniclers recorded whole streets lost because a brazier tipped over at night, and people kept using them because there wasn't an alternative. The brazier wasn't just a bad invention, it was a trap disguised as comfort, a household convenience that destroyed more homes than it saved. But let's leave homes and step into medicine again, the world of trepanation drills. If you had migraines, seizures, or even bad moods, medieval physicians sometimes prescribed relieving pressure by drilling a hole into your skull. They designed hand-cranked tools specifically for boring into bone. It sounds like nightmare fuel, and it was. Infections were rampant. Many patients never survived the operation, and those who did often lived with debilitating injuries. Yet physicians swore by it, recording successes in medical texts as though it were cutting-edge science. The invention of the cranial drill didn't solve pain or sickness. It created suffering on a scale we can barely comprehend. A literal hole in the head that passed as medicine. And here's the last of our 9 disasters: medieval siege towers. On paper they were genius. Build a massive rolling wooden structure taller than castle walls, push it forward, and storm the defenses from above. In practice, the towers were so heavy they bogged down in mud, burned easily when enemies launched fire arrows, and collapsed under their own weight. Thousands of labor hours went into these giant wooden boxes, only for them to become bonfires or deadly traps for the soldiers inside. Some chronicles describe entire towers toppling over mid-siege, crushing the attackers who built them. Far from the decisive weapon they promised, siege towers often sabotaged their own armies, an invention that turned ambition into failure, leaving battlefields littered with smoldering wreckage. 9 inventions, 9 disasters. From choking horses and blinding eyeglasses to clocks that couldn't tell time and furnaces that spread plague faster than it stopped it. Medieval ingenuity was a paradox. These weren't jokes to the people who lived with them. They were earnest attempts to solve real problems: hunger, sickness, war, law, cold, but they ended up creating bigger problems in the process. And that's why these inventions matter. They remind us that human progress has never been a straight line. For every breakthrough there are failures, some ridiculous, others horrifying. Medieval society wasn't stagnant or ignorant. It was trying, experimenting, pushing boundaries with the tools it had. But often invention outpaced understanding, and instead of answers, people got disasters they had to survive. So the next time you hear about medieval brilliance, remember brilliance has a dark twin: the chastity belt, the water clock, the fire grenade, the rocket cart. Each one was a monument to creativity, and a warning about where creativity can lead when it ignores reality. These inventions didn't just fail, they made life worse, and that more than anything else is what makes them unforgettable.